Clara Whitcomb had walked the last mile through Virginia mud in July. Heat, her boots soaked through her pride, swallowed somewhere on that road, and still when she stepped into Whitcomb Hall, her aunt looked at her like something the storm had dragged in by mistake. She had not come for warmth. She had come for a signature. One letter, one name on paper that would save her brother's entire future. She would endure anything for that. What she did not expect was a stranger dragging a chair across a dining hall and sitting down beside her like she was worth something. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow every part to the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain had been falling since noon, and by the time Clara Whitcomb turned onto the post road toward Whitcomb Hall, it had become something mean and relentless, the kind of summer storm that soaked through wool and settled into bone. The hired carriage had thrown a wheel 2 miles back, and the driver had looked at her with the flat eyes of a man who had already been paid and no longer considered her his problem. She had stood in the road for a full minute, her traveling bag in one hand, her brother's future folded inside an oilcloth packet tucked against her chest, and then she had started walking. She was 24 years old. She had been walking toward Whitcomb Hall her entire life. It seemed always arriving muddy, always arriving uninvited in spirit, if not in fact, always arriving because there was nowhere else to go, and something important hanging on whatever answer her uncle chose to give. The hall itself loomed out of the tree line like a judgment. 3 stories of red brick, white-trimmed windows blazing with candle and firelight against the gray storm. The carriage drive was crowded with horses and equipages she did not recognize, fine ones with matched pears and brass lamps still smoking from the road. Company. A dinner. Of course. She had not known about the dinner. She almost turned back. The thought crossed her mind clean and serious the way honest thoughts sometimes did when her body was too tired to lie to itself. She almost turned back, took the post road to the inn at Culpeper, spent the last of her traveling money on a cot and a supper, and wrote her uncle a letter instead, like a sensible woman. But Samuel's face came to her. 17 years old, trying to look older, trying to sound certain, when he told her this clerkship in Baltimore was exactly what he needed, that he had a real chance with the naval supplier, if only Uncle Nathaniel would write his name at the bottom of a recommendation and let his reputation do the work. Samuel, who had their father's eyes and their mother's stubborn chin and absolutely no idea how cruelty worked in this family. Clara walked up the carriage drive. A stable boy took her bag with a look that was too carefully neutral to be anything but trained, and the front hall butler, a man named Grover, who had never once in 15 years of Clara's visits shown her any expression other than polite indifference, told her that Mr. and Mrs. Whitcomb were entertaining and that she might want to refresh herself before joining the company. She did not miss the word might. "Thank you, Grover," she said with all the steadiness she could hold in her voice. "I'll manage." She dried her face and hands with a cloth from her bag, unpinned and repinned her hair as best she could in the small glass above the washstand in the back hall, and changed her muddy stockings for the dry pair she had packed. Her dress was dark wool, damp at the hem, and nothing would be done about that tonight. She straightened her spine instead, which cost nothing. The dining room at Whitcomb Hall could seat 30. Tonight it held nearly 20, and they were already at table when the housemaid opened the door and Clara stepped inside. She recognized the table arrangement in 3 seconds. Her name card was at the very far end, the last seat before the servant's door, beside the cold draft that came under it every time someone pushed through to the kitchen. The china at her place was the old service, the one with the chip along the rim of the soup plate and the hairline crack across the dinner plate. She had eaten from those plates as a child. She had spent years not thinking about what it meant that she always ate from those plates. The candles at her end of the table had already burned down a full inch lower than the ones near the head. Nobody had replaced them. Every face in the room turned to look at her. Her Aunt Margaret sat at the far end near the warmth of the fire and the good candelabra and the Whitcomb family's best blue and gold china. Margaret was 51 and looked 40, which was the result of money and leisure and a complete absence of any feeling that might have carved character into her face. She smiled at Clara with the particular smile she had been perfecting since Clara first came to this house at age 9, The smile that said, "You are tolerated here, and I want you to know the difference between that and welcome." "Clara," she said. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you until Thursday." "I came early," Clara said. "I apologize for the disruption." No disruption at all. The smile did not move. "Grover, find Miss Whitcomb her seat." Grover already knew where her seat was. He had placed the card himself. Clara walked the full length of the dining room to reach it, past her Uncle Nathaniel, broad and prosperous, at the head of the table, who acknowledged her with a small nod, and then returned immediately to his conversation with the man beside him. Past the county judge and his wife, past a banker from Richmond she recognized but whose name she had forgotten, past faces that watched her with the comfortable curiosity of people who knew she was a poor relation and were mildly interested to see how she handled it. She pulled out her chair and sat down. The soup plate in front of her had a ring of dried tarnish around the rim that the kitchen had not quite cleaned. She set her hands in her lap and looked at the candles 2 inches shorter than the ones at the other end. Yes, and breathed through her nose very slowly. She was here for Samuel. She would remember that. She had almost convinced herself she was invisible enough to survive the meal when the front door opened again and the room stirred with that specific electricity that means someone important has arrived. She did not turn immediately. She heard the boots, first heavy, deliberate. Not the careful tread of a man performing his entrance, but someone who simply walked the way he walked and had no intention of adjusting it for a dining room. She heard her uncle rise from his chair, which he almost never did, and say, "Mercer, we'd given you up in this weather," with the particular warmth he reserved for men whose money and influence he respected. "Couldn't be helped," the man said. Road past the river ford was flooded. Had to come around through Hartley. Clara looked up. Elias Mercer was not what she expected from a man Nathaniel Whitcomb stood up for. He was tall somewhere in his middle 30s, with a face that had been weathered by something more serious than Virginia summers. A jaw set like a man accustomed to having his decisions questioned and having no patience for it. A coat that was good quality and completely unconcerned with its current state of road damp and mud. He was carrying his hat in his hand, not wearing it indoors, but he had not handed it to anyone either. He would decide when he was done with it. A housemaid scrambled to take his coat. He let her. His eyes moved around the table the way a man's eyes move when he walks into a room and needs 30 seconds to understand it. Not suspicious exactly, more like a man who had learned not to trust the surface of things and had turned the habit into something automatic. Those eyes reached the far end of the table. They reached Clara. She looked back at him with the calm face she had been maintaining for the last 10 minutes and thought, "Don't. Whatever you're thinking, don't." He looked at her seat. He looked at the china. He looked at the candles. Something shifted in his expression, not sympathy exactly. More like recognition. Like a man who had seen this particular arrangement before and knew exactly what it meant. He was steered towards the honored seat at Nathaniel's right hand by a flurry of housemaids and her uncle's hearty gesture. He moved toward it. Clara exhaled. "Good. Sit down. Eat your dinner and leave her to manage her own situation." He pulled out the chair at Nathaniel's right. He looked at it for a moment. Then he put both hands on it and dragged it. The sound was violent. The chair legs hit the floorboards and screamed across the room the full length of the dining hall, past the judge and his wife, past the banker from Richmond, past the servant's door, past every startled face in the room, and he jammed it into the space beside Clara so hard the table shook, and he sat down in it 6 feet 2, and absolutely immovable shoulder to shoulder with her, like he had been planning to sit there all along. The room was dead silent. Clara stared straight ahead. "Pass the butter, Miss Whitcomb," Elias Mercer said. His voice was completely level. "The company is better down here." Her Aunt Margaret made a sound. It might have been a word. It might have been her dignity departing her body. Clara picked up the butter dish, the one with the chip in the base, the one the kitchen always left for her end of the table, and she held it out to him without turning her head, because if she turned her head right now, her face was going to do something she could not afford. "You're making a scene," she said very quietly. "Reckon I am," he said, taking the butter. I did not ask for your help." "No, ma'am," he agreed. He spread butter on his bread with the ease of a man who was entirely at peace with the decision he had just made. "You did not." Her uncle Nathaniel had recovered enough to speak. "Mercer," he said, his voice carrying the particular strain of a man trying to sound amused when he is not. "You're welcome at the head of the table, as you know." "I know it," Elias said. He did not move. Nathaniel laughed. It was a short, unhappy laugh. "As you like, then." The dinner resumed around them the way water resumes flowing when you remove a stone, carefully finding new channels, pretending the disruption had been minor. But Clara could feel the temperature in the room had changed. The judge's wife kept glancing down the table. The banker's attention had shifted. Her Aunt Margaret was holding herself so still that Clara could see the effort of it from 20 feet away. Elias Mercer ate his soup. He said nothing more to her for several minutes, and she was grateful for it, in the complicated way you are grateful for things that also make your situation worse. Finally, without looking at her, he said, "How long have you been coming to this house?" "Since I was 9, she said. "And they've always sat you down here?" "Not always." She kept her voice even. "Only when there are guests. When it is just family, I eat in the morning room." "That's worse," he said. She had never thought about it that way. She thought about it now. "Why are you here?" he asked, still quietly, still without the tone of a man performing concern. "My brother needs a letter of recommendation," she said. "My uncle's signature. It will take 5 minutes of his time, and it will change Samuel's life." "And you walked through that storm to ask for it." The carriage broke down. "I know," he said. "I passed it on the road. Driver was sitting under a tree eating his lunch." Something hot and helpless moved through her chest. She pressed it down. "It's all right," she said. "No, Miss Whitcomb," he said quietly. "It ain't." She finally looked at him. He was looking at his plate, cutting his meat with the particular focus of a man who is not actually thinking about his meat at all. "Why did you move your chair?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father was a man like your uncle, rich, respected, kept his books in perfect order, and starved his tenants slow enough nobody could prove it was murder." His jaw shifted. "I sat at the good end of the table for 18 years before I understood what the rest of the room looked like from where the people he used had to sit." Clara was quiet. "I don't move my chair for pity," he said. "I move it because men like your uncle depend on everybody else sitting still." She looked at the dining hall, at Nathaniel's satisfied profile, at Margaret's rigid back, at the china that was just different enough from hers to make the point without saying it, and she understood what he was doing. He was not rescuing her. He was refusing to be a prop in her humiliation. It was a different thing entirely. The soup was removed, and the fish course arrived. A housemaid appeared at Clara's elbow. Not the scullery girl who usually served the bottom end of the table, but one of the senior maids with the good tray. Clara noticed it. She thought the maid noticed her noticing it. Across the table, one of the Richmond men, a cotton merchant named Howell, who had been talking to his neighbor all through the soup, turned and addressed Elias directly. "Mercer, I didn't expect to see you at Whitcomb's table this season. I thought you were in Richmond disputing that land title business." "Settled," Elias said. "In your favor, I take it." In the favor of the family that had been farming that land for 40 years before someone decided to find a paperwork error in the original deed. Howell laughed the laugh of a man who finds ruthlessness amusing when it belongs to someone he likes. "You've got no patience for that kind of maneuvering." "No." Elias agreed. He glanced sideways at Clara briefly. "I don't." After the fish course, there was a pause in the meal, servants clearing, Nathaniel deep in conversation with the judge, Margaret occupied with the ladies at her end, and Elias turned slightly toward Clara for the first time. "Your uncle's books," he said, very low. "Does he keep them himself, or does he have a man?" She looked at him. "Why?" "I've heard things, from tenant families in this county, things I'd like to know the truth of." "What kind of things?" "Grain charges set 3 times above the going rate. relief money promised to widow families after the crop failures last year that never arrived. His voice did not change. Church charity fund that was approved by the vestry in March and seems to have gone quiet since. Clara's hands had gone still in her lap. She had heard things too. She had not let herself look at them directly. She had needed her uncle's signature, and looking directly at certain things made it very difficult to keep asking for favors. "I don't have access to his books," she said carefully. "But you've seen numbers," he said. "Woman who can read ledgers always notices numbers whether she means to or not." She looked at her plate. She said nothing. "I'm not asking you to do anything," he said. "I'm only saying I would not be surprised if the books at Whitcomb Hall told a story that the front parlor does not." The servants returned with the meat course. Elias turned back to his plate. The conversation at the head of the table swelled around them again, and for a while they ate in silence, which was a different kind of silence than the one that had existed before he moved his chair. Nathaniel's voice floated down the table, warm and expansive. "Finest harvest counties seen in 3 years if the weather holds." Elias did not react, but his knife paused just barely on his plate. Clara thought about the widow on the lower farm road, whose name she could never quite remember, whose husband had died of the lung fever in February, and who had come to Whitcomb Hall twice in the spring, asking about the relief money the vestry had allocated. Both times, Clara had seen her turned away at the kitchen door. Both times, she had told herself it was not her business, that she did not know the circumstances, that interfering would cost her what little standing she had in this house. She thought about that widow now. She thought about her brother Samuel with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, waiting for a letter that would change his life. She thought about Elias Mercer dragging a chair the full length of a dining room because a powerful man was using silence as a weapon. Dessert arrived. Aunt Margaret announced that the ladies would take their tea in the front parlor, which was her way of enforcing the separation. She preferred herself in warmth and comfort. Nathaniel holding court with the men Clara handled by distance and routine. Clara rose with the other women. As she stood, Elias stood too because he had manners, regardless of what his coat looked like. And as she passed his chair, he said, still quietly enough that only she could hear, "Miss Whitcomb, your uncle will not give you that letter." She stopped. "He has no intention of it," Elias said. He was not looking at her. He was setting his napkin on the table with the care of a man who considers what he does with his hands. "He'll delay you. He'll wait for you to endure enough that asking becomes harder than leaving. That is how he keeps people useful and grateful at the same time." "You don't know that," she said. "I know men who run their tables the way he runs his," Elias said. "I know what it means when the poor relation gets the chipped china." Clara stood very still. "I am not helpless," she said. "No, ma'am," he agreed. "You are not. That's exactly why I'm telling you." The ladies had moved into the hallway. Margaret's voice floated back polished and bright, and slightly too loud, and Clara knew her name was being discussed in tones that were not kind. She made herself walk toward the parlor door. At the threshold she paused, though she had not planned to. "Thank you," she said without turning around. "For the chair." "Thank me by not waiting on him," Elias said. "There are other roads to Baltimore." She went into the parlor. She sat in the chair they pointed her toward. Not the worst one because the men were watching through the open door, and even Margaret had limits when there were witnesses. And she drank her tea from a cup that was not chipped, and looked at the fire, and thought about ledgers. About numbers that didn't add up. About a widow turned away at a kitchen door twice in one spring. About a man who had dragged his chair the full length of a dining room, because he had learned from 18 years of sitting at the wrong end of the truth that silence was the first tool of men who meant to steal from everyone around them. Outside, the Virginia summer rain beat against the hall's windows. Inside, Clara Whitcomb began very quietly to think about what she actually knew. Clara did not sleep. She lay on the narrow bed in the guest room at the back of the second floor, the one with the window that faced the stable yard, the one they always gave her, the one that shared a wall with the linen closet and smelled faintly of cedar and old wool. And she stared at the ceiling and thought about numbers. Not Samuel's numbers, Not the cost of lodging in Baltimore, or the salary of a naval clerk, or any of the arithmetic she had been doing in her head for months. She thought about Nathaniel's numbers, the ones Elias Mercer had named at the dinner table, in a voice so quiet it barely carried over the sound of silver on china. Grain charges set 3 times above the going rate. Relief money promised and not delivered. A church fund approved in March, gone quiet since. She had told herself for 2 years that what happened on Nathaniel Whitcomb's tenant farms was not her business. She had told herself she didn't have enough information. She had told herself that interfering would cost her what little standing she had, and Samuel needed that standing, and she could not afford principles that cost more than she had. She was lying in the dark now, and she could hear how those arguments sounded, without the noise of necessity to cover them. They sounded like her Aunt Margaret's voice. She got up before dawn. The house was quiet, in the particular way old houses are quiet in summer. Not silent, but still creaking occasionally with the temperature, the distant sound of a kitchen maid already at the stove somewhere below. Clara, dressed in the dark, pinned her hair without a glass, and went downstairs through the back corridor, the servants' route, because it was faster, and because she had spent enough years in this house to know that the back of it was always more honest than the front. She was heading for the library. She told herself she only wanted to think, that she was not planning anything, that she was going to sit in the chair by the library window and watch the sun come up over the east field and decide calmly and rationally whether there was anything to decide. She pushed open the library door. Elias Mercer was already there. He was standing at Nathaniel's writing desk, not sitting. Standing with a ledger open in front of him, and a candle burned nearly to nothing beside it, and he looked up when she came in with the expression of a man who had not expected company, but was not surprised by it either. "You couldn't sleep," he said. "No," she said. She looked at the ledger. "Is that his estate accounts, 3rd shelf from the bottom behind the Blackstone?" He closed it not quickly, just closed it with the care of a man putting something back where it belonged. "I didn't take it out to steal from it. I took it out because I needed to know if what I've been told matches what's written down." "Does it?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Come look," he said. She crossed the room. He opened the ledger again, turned it toward her, and held the candle close. His finger moved down a column of figures, tenant grain charges, quarterly organized by farm name. She followed his hand and understood within 30 seconds what she was looking at. She had kept her own household accounts since she was 16. She knew what grain prices ran in Virginia. She knew what a fair quarterly charge looked like. These were not fair quarterly charges. "He's billing them at 4 times market," she said. Her voice came out very flat. "Not 3, 4. "I noticed that too," Elias said. "After the crop failures last autumn, when families had no surplus to sell and had to buy back what they needed just to feed themselves." Clara turned the page. The relief fund column was there plain as anything, allocations, recorded amounts authorized by the vestry, dates noted, and then nothing. No disbursement records, no receipts, no notation of delivery, just a line of authorized amounts and then white space where the proof of payment should have been. "He recorded the authorization," she said, "but not the delivery." "Because he never delivered it." She turned another page. Her hands were steady. She was surprised by that in some distant part of herself that was still observing the situation rather than living inside it. She had expected her hands to shake. They did not. What she felt was not panic. It was something colder and more clarifying than panic. It was the feeling of finally looking directly at a thing you had been refusing to see. "The church fund," she said. "Next column." She found it. $1,500 allocated in March for widow relief and orphan support. The vestry minutes would have recorded the vote. The county families would have congratulated themselves on their Christian generosity. And here in Nathaniel Whitcomb's estate ledger, $1,500 sat in a column with a single notation beside it, transferred operating account, April 3rd. His operating account. His personal operating account. Clara stepped back from the desk. "He's been doing this for how long?" she asked. "Best I can tell from what's here, at least 4 years. Probably longer." The earlier ledgers aren't on this shelf. 4 years. She said it quietly. 4 years of tenant families paying 4 times what grain was worth. 4 years of widow money sitting in his personal account. She stopped. She thought of the woman at the kitchen door in the spring turned away twice. There is a widow on the lower farm road. Her husband died in February. Hannah Ferris, Elias said. Her husband was Thomas Ferris. He worked the south parcel for 11 years. You know her name. I made it my business to know her name, he said. Same way I made it my business to know the names of the 6 other families who haven't received what they're owed. He paused. That's why I'm here, Miss Whitcomb. Not for your uncle's dinner, or his conversation, or any pleasure of his company. I came because I needed to get inside this house long enough to see whether the rumors had a bottom to them. Clara looked at him. In the early morning half-light, with the candle burning low between them, he looked less like the man who had dragged a chair across a dining room, and more like the man he had described last night, the one who had sat at the good end of his father's table for 18 years, before he understood what the rest of the room looked like. Your carriage, Axel, she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. Perfectly fine. You lied to stay. I needed more time in the house. He met her eyes. I did not expect to need help. I haven't said I'll help you. No, he said. You haven't. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the column of authorized relief money that had gone into her uncle's personal account, while Hannah Ferris stood at a kitchen door in the spring cold and was told there was nothing for her. He will never give Samuel that letter, Clara said. It was not a question. No, Elias said. He won't. He was never going to. He was going to let you believe he might, Elias said, long enough to make leaving feel like failure. That's how he keeps people. Not with chains, with almost. The word landed somewhere inside her chest and settled there with the weight of something true. Almost. Yes. That was exactly the word. Her entire relationship with Whitcomb Hall had been built on almost accepted, almost included, almost given what was needed, always just short enough of the real thing to keep her reaching. If I help you, she said carefully, what does that look like? You know this house, he said. You know where things are kept. The older ledger's letters, any correspondence with the vestry about the fund. I need primary documents, not just these accounts. Something that shows authorization on his end and no corresponding disbursement on the other. That's enough to take to a judge. Enough to take to Judge Reed, who has been trying to build a case against 3 Virginia landowners for 2 years and needs something he can stand behind in public. He paused. Reed is honest, rarer than it sounds. Clara closed the ledger and pushed it back toward him. I need to think, she said. That's fair. And I need you to put that back exactly where you found it. Already planned to. She went to the window. Outside, the stable yard was beginning to lighten the sky, going from black to the deep blue-gray of very early morning. One of the stable hands was crossing the yard with a bucket. A horse moved in its stall and snorted. She thought about Samuel. She thought about the letter that was never coming, the almost that had brought her through a broken carriage and a miles-long road through summer rain to sit at a chipped china end of a table and endure her aunt's smile. She thought about 4 years of grain money, about $1,500 in a church fund that had become Nathaniel Whitcomb's operating expenses, about a woman named Hannah Ferris who had come to this house twice asking for what she was owed and been turned away from the kitchen door. There's a wooden box, Clara said without turning from the window. In the study off the back parlor. Not the library, the private study, the one he keeps locked. He locks it every night before dinner and unlocks it every morning after breakfast. He's done it since I was a child. I always thought it was just his habit. She paused. But the key is on his watch chain. He never takes the watch chain off, which means whatever is in that box is something he keeps close. Elias was quiet for a moment. You think the older ledgers are in there, he said. I think whatever he doesn't want a guest to find during a late-night visit to the library is in there, she said. Yes. The study lock, he said. Do you know the make? It's a Brahma. He had it installed 8 years ago. He talked about it at dinner. He was very pleased with himself. Brahma locks don't pick easily. No, she agreed. But the study has a connecting door to the back parlor. I have never seen it used. I don't know if it's been sealed. Another silence. Miss Whitcomb, Elias said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite the tone he'd used before, less deliberate, less measured. More like a man who was genuinely surprised and was deciding whether to show it. You have been in this house 15 years, and you noticed all of that. I notice things, she said. I always have. It's what you do when you're the person nobody thinks is worth watching. She heard him move the sound of the ledger being replaced on the shelf, the creak of the floorboard under his weight as he crossed the room. He came to stand beside her at the window, not close an appropriate distance, but beside her, looking out at the same stable yard and the same early light. Samuel, he said. Your brother. Yes, I have a letter, he said. I wrote it 2 weeks ago before I came here. It's addressed to a man named Caldwell in Baltimore. He supplies the Navy out of Fells Point and owes me a personal favor that I've been holding for 3 years. He reached into his coat and removed a sealed letter, folded once sealed with plain wax, no crest. It says I have a young man of good character and reliable judgment who would benefit from a clerkship, and that I personally vouch for him, and that I would take it as a kindness if Caldwell would give him a start. Clara stared at the letter. You wrote this before you arrived, she said. I knew your uncle wouldn't sign anything. I told you I know men who run their tables the way he does. You came here for the ledgers, she said slowly. You already had a letter for Samuel. I saw no reason not to solve 2 problems at once, he said. She took the letter from his hand. It was real, she could feel the weight of it, the slightly rough texture of the paper, the firmness of the wax seal. A real letter to a real man, with a real ability to give her brother what he needed. For a moment she could not speak. She had walked through rain and mud for this. She had endured the chipped china and her aunt's smile and the cold draft from the servant's door for this. She had come to this house ready to beg a man she did not trust for a favor she was not sure he had any intention of giving. And it had been written before she arrived. Why didn't you tell me last night? She asked. Her voice was not entirely steady. Because last night you hadn't decided yet whether I was someone worth trusting, he said simply. And I didn't want to buy your cooperation with your brother's future. That's not the kind of help I offer. She pressed her lips together hard. She was not going to cry in front of Elias Mercer in her uncle's library at 5 in the morning. She had decided that before she'd even known she needed to decide it. She pressed the letter flat between her palms and breathed slowly. Thank you, she said, when she was certain her voice would hold. Don't thank me yet, he said. Your aunt is going to make the next 3 days very unpleasant. As if in answer to that prediction, the floorboard outside the library door creaked. They both went still. The creak came again, deliberate weight shifting, and then silence. Not the silence of someone passing. The silence of someone standing and listening. Elias moved first. He stepped back from the window and put 3 feet of distance between himself and Clara in a single unhurried motion. And then he crossed to the nearest bookshelf and opened the first volume his hand found and held it with the ease of a man who had been reading for the last hour and had simply gotten up to stretch his legs. Clara set the letter in her pocket, picked up the candle from the desk, which was nearly guttered and in legitimate need of replacement, and turned toward the door as if she had come in to deal with exactly that. The door opened. Her Aunt Margaret stood in the doorway in her dressing gown with her hair in its nightcap and an expression on her face that Clara had never quite seen before. Not the polished cruelty of the dinner table. Something rawer than that. Something that knew it had walked into a room and found what it was afraid of finding. Her eyes moved from Clara to Elias, to the desk, to the bookshelf, and back to Clara. You're up early, Margaret said. The candle in my room burned out, Clara said. She held up the guttered stub in her hand. I came to find a replacement. In the library. The housemaids keep a box of them on the second shelf by the door. They always have. A long pause. Margaret's eyes went to Elias again. He was reading or performing reading with the convincing ease of a man who had probably done this before. "Mr. Mercer," Margaret said. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said without looking up. "You're an early riser. I heard movement." "Insomnia," he said. "Old habit. I hope I haven't disturbed the house." He turned a page. "Excellent library your husband keeps. I've been wanting to read this Blackstone for years." He was holding the Blackstone, the same shelf where the ledger lived. Margaret's jaw tightened. "Clara," she said, her voice dropping to the register she used when she wanted to cause pain without raising it to the level of a scene. "A word, in the hall." Clara followed her out. The library door closed behind them. Margaret turned and looked at her with the full weight of 20 years of accumulated resentment and social anxiety, and the particular fury of a woman who has built her power on everyone else's compliance and has just seen a piece of it move without her permission. "You will not make a fool of this family," Margaret said very quietly. "Whatever game you think you're playing." "I came for a candle," Clara said. "You came for much more than a candle, and we both know it." Margaret stepped closer. Her voice went lower. "Elias Mercer is a wealthy man and a useful connection, and I will not have you attaching yourself to him like a burr on a coat hem, and embarrassing us in front of someone who matters to your uncle's business interests." I don't care what you weren't," Margaret said. "I care what it looks like. I care that a man like Mercer sees a poor relation wandering the library at dawn in yesterday's dress and draws the conclusion that this household has no standards." Her eyes were bright with the specific intensity of someone who has been awake in the night worrying about exactly this. "Once he leaves, and he will leave Clara, his axle will be repaired today. If I have to pay the blacksmith myself, your situation here becomes a conversation I intend to have with Nathaniel." Clara looked at her aunt. She looked at the woman who had put her name card at the far end of the table, who had given her the chipped china, who had made every visit to this house for 15 years, into a small, careful ceremony of exclusion. And she felt something she had not let herself feel in years. Not hurt. She was past hurt with Margaret. She felt contempt. Clean, clarifying contempt. The kind that does not perform itself. "Aunt Margaret," she said, "I will be at breakfast." She walked back toward the servants' stair. She heard Margaret's dressing gown swish against the floorboards as she turned in the other direction, heard the sound of her retreating toward the main staircase, and then she was alone in the back corridor, with Samuel's letter in her pocket, and the knowledge of what was in Nathaniel's estate ledger sitting inside her chest like a coal that had been banked low for a long time and was finally beginning to glow. Breakfast was a performance. Nathaniel presided over the table with his usual Saturday morning ease. Generous, expansive, the version of himself he wore for company. The one that made neighbors describe him as a fine man and a good steward of the county's traditions. He asked Elias about the Richmond land dispute with the genuine interest of a man who respected the outcome, if not the methods. He asked the judge about the upcoming court session. He poured coffee himself, which he did when he wanted people to notice that he was the kind of wealthy man who still poured his own coffee. He did not speak to Clara directly. He never did when there were other people worth speaking to. But Clara noticed something this morning that she had not let herself notice before. She noticed the way Nathaniel's eyes moved, the way they tracked the room, noting who was speaking to whom, who was laughing at what, who held influence, and whether that influence was aligned with his own. The way those eyes paused briefly but perceptibly on Elias Mercer, measuring something, recalculating something, and then moved on with the smoothness of a man who had been doing this long enough not to show the work. He was afraid of Elias. Not much, not openly, but there was a quality of watchfulness in Nathaniel Whitcomb this morning that had not been present last night before the chair. Clara buttered her bread. She ate from good china Elias had made that impossible to avoid, and Nathaniel was too smart a social performer to reinstate the chipped plates with a witness at the table who had already registered an opinion on the matter. She drank her coffee. She smiled when smiled at. She answered questions when asked. And she thought about the connecting door to the private study. The back parlor connected to the study through a door that Clara had never seen used. She had noticed it at age 11 the summer she spent 8 rainy weeks at Whitcomb Hall, after her parents died, when she had explored every room in the house with the thoroughness of a child who has nothing else to do and nowhere else to be. The door had been painted over not recently but years before a lazy coat that had sealed the hinges without truly locking them. She had tried the handle once. 11 years old, curious alone. It had given slightly. Not opened, but given the resistance of old paint over old hinges, not of a locked bolt. She had not tried it again. She had forgotten about it until this morning, standing at her uncle's library window, when the shape of the problem had suddenly matched the shape of a memory she had not thought about in 15 years. After breakfast, she waited. She waited through the mid-morning when the guests moved between the parlors and the porch and the sunny side of the east garden. She was pleasant to the judge's wife, who was kind and a little bored. She was invisible to the Richmond banker, which was exactly how she wanted it. She watched Elias across the room. He was talking to Nathaniel about something that made Nathaniel laugh a shade too heartily, and she waited until the house had settled into its late morning rhythms and found its excuse for solitude. She slipped into the back parlor at 10:30. The door was as she remembered it, painted over hinges, thick with old layering, a handle that looked sealed. She put her hand flat on the door panel and pressed. Felt the same faint give she had felt at 11 years old. She pressed harder. The paint cracked along the upper seam with a sound like a whispered word. She stopped, listened. The house moved around her in its usual Saturday patterns. Voices from the east porch, footsteps above the distant clatter of the kitchen. She pressed again. The door swung inward. The private study was small and close, the curtains drawn, smelling of tobacco and old paper, and the particular staleness of a room that is used by one person who does not like it aired. The wooden box was on the desk. Not locked, she could see the hasp was unlatched. Nathaniel had unlocked it that morning for his post-breakfast review of whatever he kept in it, and he had not yet locked it again because he was in the east parlor, being a fine Virginia landowner who poured his own coffee. Clara lifted the lid. The older ledgers were there, 4 of them small, leather-bound, labeled by year, and beneath them a bundle of letters tied with brown cord, and beneath those a folded document that she recognized by its format before she read a word of it. A vestry authorization, the church seal at the top, the relief fund allocation in Nathaniel's own handwriting at the bottom. Signed by him. Dated March. With a notation in the margin in a different ink in what she recognized as her uncle's private shorthand, transferred O/A, April 3rd. Operating account. April 3rd. Her hands were very steady. She could not take these. Not yet. Not today. Taking them now would alert him before anything was in place, and without Judge Reed already in possession of the case, there was nothing to protect her when Nathaniel discovered they were gone. But she could copy them. She had done her father's correspondence since she was 14. She wrote quickly and accurately, and her hand was small enough to get a great deal on a single page. She went back through the connecting door, pulled it to its painted shut position, went to the library, took 3 sheets of writing paper from the desk drawer and the small ink pot from the shelf and went back. She copied the vestry authorization in full. She copied the ledger pages for the last 4 years. Grain charges, relief fund columns. Church fund disbursements. Her hand moved fast and even across the page, and she wrote the numbers clean and true, exactly as they appeared, because numbers did not need embellishment to tell their story. When she was done, she folded the pages into her pocket beside Samuel's letter, put the ledgers back exactly as she found them, closed. The box lid went back through the connecting door, pressed it back to its painted shut position, and walked out of the back parlor into the corridor as if she had come from the direction of the stairs. She nearly walked directly into Elias. He caught her by the arms to steady her. 1 second, no more hands on her elbows, a firm automatic catch, and then released her immediately. "Easy," he said. She looked up at him. She was breathing a little fast. She made herself slow it. "I have the numbers," she said. 4 years. The vestry authorization with his signature and the transfer notation, all of it copied. Elias went very still. "You went into the study," he said. The connecting door from the back parlor hadn't been properly sealed. "Clara." He said her name without the miss, and she noticed it but did not stop him. "If he finds out—" "He won't find out today," she said. "He hasn't locked the box yet this morning, which means he hasn't checked it yet. By the time he does, we need to be ready to move." She met his eyes. "How quickly can you get a message to Judge Reed?" Elias looked at her for a long moment. The measuring look, the one she had first seen across a dining room last night, except this time it was not measuring her endurance. It was measuring something else. "Sunday service," he said. "Reed attends the county church. It's 2 miles from here. If I can get a message to him before noon service tomorrow." "The whole county will be there," Clara said. "Yes." "Then that's when we go." Elias looked at her, really looked at her the way he had not quite looked at her before, with the full attention of a man who has been underestimating something and has just been shown his error clearly enough to correct it. "I thought I came here to protect you," he said. "You came here to get into the ledgers," Clara said. "I just got there faster." A sound from the east parlor, her uncle's laugh, bright and carrying, drifted into the corridor. Elias looked in the direction of the sound. When he looked back at Clara, something had settled in his face. The measuring was done. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "before he can lock the study." "Before breakfast," Clara said. "I know where the originals are." She walked toward the back staircase and did not look back because she had learned a long time ago that looking back was what people did when they were not sure about a decision. She was sure. For the first time in a very long time, she was completely sure. She did not sleep that night either. But this time, it was different. The first night she had lain awake with the sick, crawling discomfort of a woman who had been refusing to look at something true. This night she lay awake with the sharp, clean alertness of someone who has already looked and cannot unlearn what she saw. The copied pages were folded inside her stays against her skin. Because it was the one place in this house that no one could search without making a scene, she would survive, and they would not. She went through the numbers again in her head. Not because she had forgotten them, because she needed to be certain that when she stood in front of Judge Reed tomorrow, she could speak them from memory cleanly, without hesitation, without the trembling voice of a woman who was afraid. Numbers did not lie. Numbers were the one language that required no interpretation and could not be dismissed as hysteria or ingratitude or a poor relation's spite. 4 years. Grain charges at 4 times market rate collected quarterly from 11 tenant families. Relief money authorized by the vestry in 3 separate rounds and never disbursed. The church fund $1,500 moved to Nathaniel Whitcomb's operating account on April 3rd with a notation in his own hand. And beneath all of that, going back further in the oldest of the ledgers, she had copied a pattern of small falsifications that were individually deniable and collectively damning. The house settled around her. She listened to it. She heard the clock on the landing strike 2, then 3. She heard the rain begin again around 4, lighter than the night before, a summer shower that tapped at the window with less conviction than its predecessor. She heard at 4:30 a floorboard in the corridor. 1 step, a pause, 2 steps, another pause. Someone who did not want to be heard. Clara was out of bed before she had made a conscious decision to move. She crossed to the door in her stocking feet and stood with her ear against the wood and her hand on the latch and waited. The footsteps moved past her door, continued toward the back staircase, descended. She knew those footsteps, not Elias. His room was on the other side of the house, the guest wing, and his tread was heavier and more deliberate. Not a housemaid too late and too careful. She had heard those footsteps for 15 years on the floors of this house. Her uncle Nathaniel was going to his study. At 4:30 in the morning. Clara counted to 30. Then she opened her door and followed. She did not take a candle. She had spent enough nights navigating this house in the dark as a child to know where the stair treads creaked and where they did not, where the corridor narrowed and where the rugs ran thick enough to silence a step. She moved through the house the way she had moved through it at 11 years old when she was small and silent, and nobody thought she was worth watching. She reached the bottom of the back stair and stopped. Light under the study door. The private study, not the library. He had gone in through the main entrance, the locked one with the key on his watch chain. She stood in the dark corridor, and she thought very fast. If he was in the study at 4:30, he had been woken by something, or he had never slept. If he had never slept, it was because something was troubling him. If something was troubling him, it might be the same something that was troubling her. If he checked the box and found the order of the ledgers disturbed, she had been careful. She had been so careful. But careful was not the same as perfect. Then everything ended here in this corridor before Sunday even arrived. She pressed herself against the wall and waited. She heard him moving inside. The sound of a drawer. The sound of papers. A pause that stretched long enough to make her breathing go shallow. Then the specific small deliberate sound of a lock being turned. He was locking the box. He had opened it to check and he was now locking it, which meant he had found it either undisturbed or disturbed enough to make him frightened. She could not tell which. The light under the door moved candle shifting, and she heard his footsteps crossing the study toward the main door. She was already moving back up the stair, silent and fast, around the corner to the linen corridor, before his key hit the lock from the inside. She stood in the dark with her hand pressed flat against the linen closet door, and heard him come out of the study, heard him lock it behind him, heard him walk back toward the main staircase, with the slower, heavier tread of a man carrying something on his mind. She waited until she could not hear him at all. Then she went back down. She went to the library. She found Elias already there. She had half expected it. She realized the way you half expect things that make sense even before they happen. He was standing at the window, not reading this time, just standing. And he turned when she came in with the particular stillness of a man who had been awake a long time and was conserving his attention for what mattered. "He was in the study," she said. Elias looked at her. "Just now," she said. "He went in at 4:30. I heard him on the stair. He locked the box when he left." "Did he lock it before or after examining the contents?" "After." She crossed to the desk. "I heard papers. He checked everything." Elias was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he either found nothing wrong or he found enough wrong to frighten him, and has now secured the originals against a repeat. "If it's the second," Clara said, "we can't wait until Sunday." "No," Elias agreed. "We can't." She thought of the copied pages folded inside her stays. If the originals were now inaccessible, she still had the copies. Copies in her own hand, which a clever lawyer could argue were fabricated. Without the originals behind them, her handwritten numbers were just the word of a poor relation against the word of a respectable Virginia landowner. She needed those originals. "There has to be another way into that study," she said. "The connecting door. He'll have checked it if he's frightened. He may have wedged it." She pressed her knuckles against the desktop and thought. "Grover, the head butler." Elias looked at her sharply. "Grover has worked this house for 22 years, she said. "He's seen everything. He's kept everything. Men like my uncle need a Grover because there are errands that can't be run by a man with a respectable reputation." She met Elias's eyes. "And men who run those errands for a long time eventually understand that they're standing on the same cliff edge as the man who sent them." "You think he'd talk?" "I think he's been watching for 15 years and he is not a stupid man, and he knows what a house of cards looks like from the inside." She paused. "I think if someone gave him a reason to believe the cards were already falling, he would not sacrifice himself to stop them." Elias studied her for a long moment. "You said you'd been invisible in this house since you were 9, he said. "Yes." "You weren't invisible at all," he said. "You were watching." "I was watching," she said. "There is a difference." Outside, the summer rain had stopped. The sky past the library window was beginning to separate from black into the dark blue of very early morning. They had maybe 2 hours before the house started waking. "I'll speak to Grover," Elias said. "No," Clara said. "I will. He knows me. He's kept his careful distance from me for 15 years, which means he's never been required to be cruel to me, Margaret handles that herself. That matters. You're a stranger to him. I'm just the person he's been pointedly neutral toward for 2 decades, and right now, neutral is a foundation I can work from." Elias opened his mouth, closed it. She could see him processing the argument and finding it sound. "All right," he said. "Stay here," she said. "If Nathaniel comes down early, make it obvious you've been reading all night. You're the kind of man who reads all night. Nobody will question it." She found Grover in the kitchen passage at 10 minutes past 5, supervising the first bread delivery of the morning with the focused attention of a man who understood that his authority over the household's daily logistics was the source of whatever dignity this position had ever given him. He was 61 years old, gray-haired, and had the straight-backed bearing of a man who had spent his entire adult life performing a competence that deserved better than the house it served. He saw her coming, and his face did the thing it always did, a careful neutral settling the mask of professional distance. "Miss Whitcomb," he said. "Grover," she said. She kept her voice low and even. "I need a minute of your time. I am rather occupied. I know what's in the estate ledgers," she said. The kitchen passage went very quiet. Grover looked at her. For the first time in 15 years of careful neutrality, something moved behind his eyes that was not neutral at all. "I don't know what you mean," he said. "Yes, you do," she said, just as quietly. "And I think you've known for a long time. And I think the reason you're still in this house after 22 years isn't loyalty. It's because you know enough that leaving would be dangerous, and staying is the only position from which you can watch what happens and protect yourself." She paused. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because Judge Reed is going to receive a full accounting tomorrow, and when he does, the question of who in this household cooperated and who did not is going to matter enormously to what happens next." Grover had gone perfectly still. The bread delivery boy looked between them with the anxious expression of someone who understood he was witnessing something important and wanted very badly not to be there. "Thomas," Grover said without taking his eyes off Clara, "take those loaves to the dry larder and close the door behind you." The boy disappeared. "The vestry authorization," Clara said. "The one for the church fund in March. My uncle has the original in his study. You witnessed the delivery of those funds to his hand." A very long pause. "Miss Whitcomb," Grover said carefully, "what you're describing, what I'm describing is a man named Elias Mercer, who has the ear of Judge Amos Reed, and who is prepared to stand in front of the entire county congregation at Sunday service and put 4 years of estate accounts into the judge's hands." She watched his face. "The question is whether those accounts include a witness statement from a man who was present when the funds were transferred, or whether they include a statement from a man who was present and said nothing." Grover looked at the kitchen door. He looked at the floor. He looked at his own hands, which were clasped in front of him with the rigidity of a man holding himself together by will. "He told me it was a bookkeeping adjustment," he said finally. "2 years ago, the second round of relief money." His voice was very low. "He said it was temporary, that it would be corrected in the next quarter." "It was never corrected." "No," Grover said. "It was not." "The Ferris widow," Clara said. "Hannah Ferris. You were at the kitchen door both times she came." The old butler closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Then he opened them and looked at Clara with the expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just been told he can put it down and is not yet sure he trusts the offer. "What do you need?" he said. "The study," Clara said. "Before breakfast. I need 5 minutes." He reached into his breast pocket. He held out a key. "The connecting door bolt from this side," he said. "He had it installed last winter. I have the duplicate." His jaw was tight. "I told myself I kept it in case of emergency." Clara took the key. "It is an emergency," she said. She was back in the library with the key in her hand in under 4 minutes. Elias looked at the key and then at her, and did not ask how she had managed it. He simply picked up his coat from the chair where he had laid it and said, "Now, now," she said, "before he comes down." They went together through the back parlor. The connecting door swung open on its bolt with a quietness that felt almost indecent. All that solidity, all that suggestion of permanence and security, opening with a single small turn of a key. The study was dark and close. Clara did not waste time. She went to the desk, opened the box he had locked the hasp. But the key was a simple one, and Grover's duplicate turned it without resistance, and she took the 4 ledgers, and the bundle of letters, and the vestry authorization with her uncle's signature on it. She did not take them all. She took the vestry authorization and the 2 most recent ledgers, the ones with the clearest, most legible record of the grain charges and the relief fund diversions. The older ones she left, enough to convict. Not so much that the theft was immediately obvious to a man doing a quick check. She folded the documents inside Elias's coat, which he had brought specifically because it had a deep inner pocket, and it was his coat, and nobody searched a guest's coat without a very good reason. They were back in the library, with the study relocked, and the connecting door bolted, and the key returned to her pocket in under 7 minutes. Clara sat down in the library chair. She put both hands flat on her knees. She breathed. "You're all right," Elias said. It was not a question. "I'm fine," she said. "You're shaking." She looked at her hands. He was right, very slightly. Not fear, she recognized fear, and this was not quite it. It was the particular trembling of someone whose body had been running on pure focused intention for the last 2 hours and had just been told it could stop. "I'll be all right in a minute," she said. He crouched down in front of her chair, not looming over her at her level, and looked at her directly. "Clara, you just did in 7 minutes what I came here to spend 3 days working toward." "I had context you didn't have," she said. "You had 15 years of paying attention in a house that treated you like furniture," he said. "That's not nothing, that's everything." She looked at him. She was not accustomed to being told that the skills she had developed in order to survive something difficult were worth anything. The world tended to look at those skills and see only the difficult thing they had survived. "The message to read," she said. "How do we get it out?" "I have a man," Elias said. "Thomas Greer at the Post Road Inn at Hartley. He carries messages for me when I need them carried quietly. I'll ride out this morning with my carriage supposedly for the blacksmith. My fictional axle remains dramatically cracked, and I'll get a letter to Greer, and Greer will have it to Reed's house before noon service today. Reed will read it today. Reed has been waiting for something like this for 2 years, Elias said. He'll read it within 10 minutes of receiving it, and he'll spend the rest of the day thinking about the best way to handle what comes next." Clara nodded. She pressed her hands flat on her knees again and stood up. "Then you need to leave within the hour," she said, "before the house is fully awake." "And you," he said, rising, "you need to get through today without letting him know anything is wrong. I've been getting through days in this house without letting anything show since I was 9 years old," she said. "I think I can manage one more." He almost smiled. She saw it, just the corner of it, just the suggestion before his face settled back into its customary resolution. He was halfway to the library door when Margaret's voice came from the main stair, clear, carrying and aimed at a specific target, with the precision of a woman who had been awake long enough to plan her opening move. "Nathaniel!" Her voice rang through the upper hall. "I think you should come down. I have something I need to show you." Clara and Elias looked at each other. They heard Nathaniel's door, his footsteps on the stair. Margaret's voice again lower now, directional. She was steering him somewhere. The library door was closed. They stood on either side of it perfectly still and listened to the footsteps pass down the main corridor, turn toward the back parlor. Toward the back parlor. Clara's breath stopped. She heard the back parlor door open. A pause. Margaret's voice precise and deliberate. "The connecting door. Look at the frame, Nathaniel. Look at the dust." The paint. The cracked paint on the connecting door frame where Clara had pushed it open yesterday morning. She had pressed it back to its position, but she had not repaired the crack in the paint. She had not thought about the crack in the paint. She had thought about everything else, and she had not thought about that. Nathaniel's voice came through the wall, very quiet, the quiet of a man whose mind is moving very fast. When? I don't know, Margaret said. But look at the bolt key. Look at the scratch on the plate. Someone has used a duplicate. Silence. Then Nathaniel said one word flat and certain as a stone dropped in water. Clara. Elias moved first. He put his hand on the library door and looked at her. Study, now, or no, Clara said. Her voice was steady. She surprised herself. No, we don't run. She looked at the library door. She looked at the coat on the chair where the documents were folded inside the inner pocket. Put on your coat. Elias picked up the coat and put it on with the unhurried ease of a man who had dressed under pressure before. She opened the library door. Nathaniel Whitcomb was standing in the main corridor. Margaret 2 steps behind him, and his face wore an expression she had never seen there before. Not the jovial landowner, not the managing uncle, not the comfortable patriarch. Something stripped of all its surface. Something that looked at her with the cold, assessing focus of a man who has spent years calculating risk and has just realized a variable he dismissed is the one that undoes him. Clara, he said. Good morning, uncle, she said. You've been in my study. I don't know what you mean, she said. She held his gaze. I was in the library. I couldn't sleep. The connecting door. I haven't been in the back parlor, she said. Margaret stepped forward. Don't lie to him. Her voice was shaking slightly, not with grief, with rage. You've been conspiring with this man since the moment he walked through our door and made a spectacle of himself at my table, and I want to know what you've taken. Margaret. Elias's voice was quiet and complete. Not loud, not aggressive. Just absolutely certain, the way a man's voice sounds when he has run out of patience with theater. Be careful. Margaret turned to him with the full force of her fury. You have no standing in this house. I have standing in every courthouse in this county, Elias said. And in Judge Reed's parlor specifically, where I spent 3 hours last October discussing the management of this estate with a man who has been looking for evidence long enough that he stopped expecting to find it. He looked at Nathaniel. He hasn't stopped looking. He's just been waiting. Nathaniel had gone very still. The temperature in the corridor had changed completely. The social performance, the fine Virginia landowner, the hospitable host, the man of reputation had dropped away, the way a coat drops when the buttons give, and what stood in its place was smaller and colder and much more honest. What have you taken? Nathaniel said. Each word separate. I haven't taken anything, Clara said. I've copied what I found. The originals are where you left them. She held his gaze. The vestry will want to know about the March Fund. The tenant families will want to know about 4 years of grain charges. And Hannah Ferris will want to know where her husband's relief money went after he died. Nathaniel's jaw moved. You don't know what you're doing, he said. I know exactly what I'm doing, Clara said. I've known what I was doing since 5 o'clock this morning. Nathaniel looked at her. Really looked at her, perhaps for the first time, with the attention he reserved for things that constituted a genuine threat, and she watched him do the calculation. She watched him weigh his options, measure the distance between where he stood and where he needed to be, and arrive at the answer that the distance was too great to close this morning. He looked at Elias. Get out of my house, he said, quiet and flat. Gladly, Elias said. Soon as my carriage is ready. I'll have it ready in 10 minutes. Appreciate it. Elias turned to Clara. Miss Whitcomb, I'll be outside. He walked down the corridor and out through the front door, with the documents folded inside his coat with the ease of a man leaving a house where he was no longer welcome and had no desire to remain. Nathaniel turned back to Clara. You have no idea what you've started, he said. I think I do, she said. You'll regret this. I've been regretting the wrong things for a long time, she said. I thought it was worth correcting. She turned and walked toward the stair. Clara. His voice came after her, sharp and precise, the voice of a man making a final move. Your brother's clerkship. Every door in Baltimore. Every letter of introduction this family could have written. Every connection. All of it gone. You've destroyed it. For what? For a man who'll be done with you by winter." She stopped on the second stair. She did not turn around. "Samuel doesn't need your doors," she said. "He has better ones." She went up the stair. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, and she held her hands together in her lap, and felt the shaking start properly now. All the steadiness she had held for the last 2 hours, releasing at once, the way a dam releases when the pressure finally exceeds the structure. She let it happen. She breathed through it. She had done what she came to do, and more than she had come to do, and her brother had a letter in her pocket to a man named Caldwell in Baltimore, who owed Elias Mercer a favor. And tomorrow was Sunday, and the whole county would be at church. She packed her traveling bag. She worked quickly and methodically. Dress stockings, the oilcloth packet that had carried Samuel's papers here, now empty of its original purpose and ready to carry something new. She pinned her hair. She put on her second dress, the better one, the one she had been saving. She was ready in 20 minutes. When she came back downstairs, bag in hand, Aunt Margaret was waiting at the bottom of the main stair with the expression of a woman who has one card left and intends to play it. "If you walk out that door," Margaret said, "you will never be received in this house again. You will have no family. You will have nothing." Clara looked at her aunt. She looked at the woman who had given her chipped china and cold drafts and 15 years of calibrated exclusion and called it hospitality. "Aunt Margaret," she said with perfect steadiness, "I have been nothing in this house since I was 9 years old." She picked up her bag. "It turns out I manage very well." She walked out the front door of Whitcomb Hall into the Virginia summer morning. Elias was waiting with the carriage. He looked at her bag. He looked at her face. He said nothing, just opened the carriage door and held it, and she stepped up and inside, and the door closed and the carriage moved. Behind them, Whitcomb Hall grew smaller, and she did not look back. The carriage ride to the Hartley Inn took 40 minutes, and neither of them spoke for the first 10. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much, and the morning had used up the kind of energy that words require. And sometimes the most honest thing two people can do after walking through fire together is sit in silence and let the smoke clear. Clara watched the road through the carriage window. The Virginia countryside moved past in the full green weight of July fields, heavy with summer growth, the post road still damp from the night's rain, farmhouses beginning to show their morning smoke. She thought about how different this road looked from inside a carriage than it had looked 2 days ago on foot, soaked to the skin, her brother's future folded against her chest. Same road, different woman. Or maybe the same woman, finally acting like herself. Elias spoke first. "Greer will have Reed's letter delivered before noon," he said. "Reed will want to meet before service tomorrow. I've asked him to come to the inn at Hartley tonight if he can manage it. And if he can't, then we go to the church green as planned, and we trust that Reed is smart enough to understand what he's holding when I put the originals in his hands in front of the county." Clara thought about that. About standing on a church green in front of the whole county with documents that accused one of Virginia's most respectable landowners of stealing from widows and tenant farmers. About her voice carrying across that green. About the faces that would turn toward her. She had never wanted to be the kind of woman who stood in front of crowds. She had spent 15 years learning to take up less space. "He'll try to get ahead of it," she said. "Nathaniel, between now and tomorrow morning, he'll speak to people. He'll build the story he wants them to hear first." "Yes," Elias said. "He'll say I'm unstable, that I've always been difficult, that I fabricated numbers out of spite because he refused to help my brother." She paused. "Some of them will believe it. He's had 20 years to build those relationships." "Some of them will," Elias agreed. "That's why the originals matter. Your copies are your word against his. The originals with his handwriting on them are the truth against his word, and those are two very different contests." She looked at him. He was watching the road ahead with the focused calm of a man who had thought through the variables and settled on his position and would not be moved from it. She had met men who performed that quality, the stillness, the certainty, and men who actually possessed it. The difference was visible when things went badly. Performed certainty cracked under pressure. Real certainty got quieter. Elias Mercer had gotten quieter every time things got worse. "Your father," she said. "You said he was like Nathaniel." "More or less." "What happened to him?" A pause. The carriage hit a rut and steadied itself. "He died when I was 26, Elias said, before anyone could hold him accountable for anything. Left me an estate that looked prosperous on paper and was rotten underneath. Tenant families bled down to nothing. Creditors owed 3 years of payments, a house that needed $10,000 in repairs. Nobody had made, because the money had gone to maintain appearances at the front end." He looked at his hands. "I spent 4 years fixing it, not the house. The house was the easy part. Fixing what he'd done to the people on that land, that took longer." "Is that why you helped me?" she said. "Because of him." "I helped you because you were sitting at the wrong end of a table eating from chipped china, and nobody in that room was going to say a word about it." He glanced at her. "My reasons got more complicated after that." She did not ask him what he meant. She thought she knew, and the knowing sat in her chest, with a warmth she was not ready to examine closely. Not today. Today had too many other things in it. The Hartley Inn was a solid, plain-spoken building on the main post road, with a landlord who knew Elias by name and showed them to a private sitting room without being asked. Thomas Greer, a compact, weathered man of about 50 with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had been running quiet errands for a long time, was already there. He and Elias exchanged 6 sentences. Elias handed him a sealed letter, and Greer was gone in under 3 minutes. Clara watched him go. "He's reliable?" she asked. "He's delivered things I trusted him with for 8 years, Elias said. "Never lost one, never opened one." He sat down across from her. "Now we wait." Waiting, Clara had learned over the course of her life, was its own kind of work. It required active management. The mind's tendency to fill silence with worst cases had to be redirected constantly, like water finding new channels. She redirected hers to useful things. She thought through the vestry authorization line by line. She rehearsed the grain charge figures from memory until she could recite them without hesitation. She thought about Hannah Ferris and what it would mean to that woman to hear her husband's name spoken aloud in front of the county judge on a Sunday morning. She thought about Samuel. She should write to him. She had been putting it off because what she had to tell him kept changing. First, there was hope for Nathaniel's letter. Then there was none. Then there was something better than a letter from Nathaniel Whitcomb had ever been. She asked the landlord for paper and ink and sat at the small table by the window and wrote her brother a letter. She told him about Elias Mercer and the letter to Caldwell in Baltimore. She told him plainly without softening it because Samuel was 17 and had their father's sense and deserved the truth. She told him what she had found in Nathaniel's study and what she intended to do with it. She told him that whatever happened tomorrow, he was free. Free of the debt they had thought they owed this family, free of the almost that had kept them both reaching toward a door that was never going to open. She was sealing the letter when Elias came back into the sitting room with a look on his face that made her set the letter down. "Reed is coming tonight," he said. "He'll be here by 8. Clara exhaled. He wrote back already. Greer found him at his own estate. He wasn't in town. Reed read the letter on his doorstep. Greer said, and went inside and came back out in 10 minutes with a reply and his riding coat on. Elias sat down. "He's been waiting for this longer than I thought." "What did he say in the reply?" Elias handed her the note. She read it. Reed's handwriting was precise and economical. A lawyer's hand, no wasted strokes. Mercer. "Have long suspected. Will require originals and sworn statements if obtainable. Come tonight. Bring the young woman. Her testimony will matter as much as the documents." Reed. Her testimony. She read those 2 words again and felt the full weight of them. Not the documents alone. Not Elias's word alone. Her testimony. The poor relation's testimony. The woman who had been seated at the wrong end of the table, who had eaten from chipped china, who had been dismissed and managed and almost excluded for 15 years in a house that depended on her invisibility. Her testimony would matter. She folded the note and set it on the table. "All right," she said. Judge Amos Reed arrived at the Hartley Inn at 7:30 on a bay horse he had ridden hard from his estate, and he was not what Clara expected. She had built a picture of him from Elias's description, honest patient waiting, and she had constructed something old and careful and deliberate. Reed was 52, compact with quick gray eyes that moved over a room the way a surveyor's eyes move over land, noting elevations and distances and where the water would run. He shook Elias's hand. He looked at Clara with an attention that was assessing but not unkind. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, "you're the one who got into the study." "Yes, sir," she said. "How big?" "A duplicate key held by the head butler who witnessed the original transfer of the relief funds." Reed's eyes sharpened. "The butler will testify." "He understood the alternative," Clara said. Reed almost smiled. It was a brief, controlled thing. "Sit down, both of you. Let me see what you have." They sat at the table in the private room, Elias's coat open on the surface between them, the documents spread out in the candlelight. Reed did not touch them immediately. He looked at them first. The vestry authorization, the ledger pages, the notation in Nathaniel's hand, with the focus of a man reading something he has been trying to read for a long time and is now making sure he sees it accurately before he responds. Then he put on his reading spectacles and went through every page. The room was silent, except for the sound of paper and the distant noise of the inn's common room below. Clara sat with her hands folded and watched Reed's face, and his face told her things his voice did not yet say. The slight tightening around his mouth when he reached the grain charge column, the very still quality that came over him when he found the vestry authorization with the transfer notation. He set the last page down. "The notation," he said. "Transferred operating account April 3rd. That's his hand." "I've seen it for 15 years, Clara said. "Yes." "And you can testify to that under oath." "Yes." "The butler Grover, he was present for the original transfer. He confirmed it to me directly this morning." Reed took off his spectacles and looked at Elias. "You understand that Whitcomb will retain counsel the moment he knows this is in my hands. He has money and connections, and he will use both." "I understand it," Elias said. "And Miss Whitcomb?" Reed looked at her directly. "He will make you the story. Your character, your motives, your relationship with Mercer here. He will do everything in his power to make the jury see a vindictive woman and a wealthy man who wants his land rather than a theft and its victim." Clara met the judge's eyes. "My character is the same as it was before I walked into that study," she said. "I can't control what he says about it. I can control what I say under oath and whether the numbers I recite are accurate." She paused. "The numbers are accurate." Reed looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Good. Because in my experience, juries understand numbers better than they understand character. Numbers don't have motives." He gathered the documents and squared them precisely on the table. "I'll handle tomorrow morning. There is a process by which this needs to go. I cannot simply receive stolen documents in a churchyard and call it law." "I didn't steal them," Clara said. "I am a family member of the estate. I had access to the household through a legitimate entry, and I removed documents in the presence of a credible witness, namely Mr. Mercer, in anticipation of legal proceedings." Reed stopped. He looked at her. "Who told you that distinction?" he asked. "Nobody told me," she said. "I reasoned it." Another silence. This one had a different quality than the others. Not tension, but something closer to recalibration. Reed replacing whatever he had assumed about her with whatever she actually was. "All right," he said slowly. "That distinction may hold or counsel will argue against it. Either way, what matters most is this." He tapped the vestry authorization with his handwriting in the original with a witness who can confirm provenance. That is enough to open a formal inquiry. A formal inquiry is enough to compel the estate books through official channels. Once the books come in through official channels, what you've copied here will be confirmed 10 times over, and at that point his counsel stops earning their fee and starts trying to negotiate. He looked between them. So what I need tomorrow is not a courtroom. I need a public receipt of these documents in front of enough witnesses that it cannot be managed quietly afterward. The church green, Elias said. The church green, Reed agreed. When the congregation comes out from service before the families disperse. I'll be there. You'll hand me the originals in front of half the county. Miss Whitcomb will state what she witnessed, and Nathaniel Whitcomb, he paused, will be standing 6 feet away, because a man like him will be at Sunday service, regardless of what happened this morning. He cannot afford not to be. Clara thought about that. About her uncle standing on the church green in his Sunday coat with his careful, prosperous face, and the moment when everything he had built on other people's silence came apart in public. He'll have a story ready, she said. He's had since this morning to prepare it. He will, Reed agreed. And you'll tell a better one because yours has the documents to back it. He stood up and began folding the papers carefully back into their order. I'm keeping these tonight, in my custody. That removes the risk of him attempting to recover them from you before morning. We trust you with them, Elias said. I know you do. Reed tucked the documents inside his own coat. One more thing. The butler Grover. Can you reach him tonight? I can send a message through the stable hand at Hartley, Elias said. The boy Thomas, who was in the kitchen passage this morning, he's Greer's nephew. He knows Grover. Get a message to Grover, Reed said. I want him at the church green tomorrow. Not to testify publicly if he's not ready for that, but to be present. Nathaniel Whitcomb needs to see that the silence he has depended on has holes in it. Sometimes the presence of a witness matters as much as the words. After Reed left, Clara and Elias sat in the sitting room in the quiet of a plan that had been made and could not be unmade. The candles had burned down. The inn around them had gone to the subdued noise of late evening, a few voices in the common room, the occasional footstep on the stair. You should eat something, Elias said. I know, she said. She had not eaten since the breakfast she had barely touched at Whitcomb Hall, and her body was informing her of this with increasing clarity, but her mind kept circling the day's events and finding new angles to examine. I will in a minute. Clara. She looked up. It's going to work, he said. Not with the forced brightness of someone trying to reassure. With the flat certainty of a man who had looked at the same variables she had and arrived at the same conclusion. Reed knows what he's doing. The documents are solid. You are... He paused, and something in his face did the thing she had seen it do twice before, the slight softening that his jaw and the set of his eyes underwent when he looked at her and was not managing what he showed. You are the most competent person in this entire situation, and you have been since the moment you walked out of your room at 5 this morning. She looked at him. You moved a chair, she said. In a dining room full of people who were all choosing to sit still. I don't think I would have done any of this without that. She held his gaze. I mean that seriously. I know you do, he said. I'm not sure you're right, but I know you mean it. She almost smiled. She felt it, the actual pull of it, the first real one since she had stepped out of the rain and into Whitcomb Hall 2 nights ago. Why do you think I'm wrong? Because you were already watching, he said. You already knew about the connecting door. You already noticed the numbers. You just needed someone to make it matter that you'd noticed. She thought about that. About 15 years of attention with nowhere to go. About what it felt like to have that attention finally matter. Tomorrow is going to be hard, she said. Yes. He will say things about me in front of people. Yes. And I will stand there and let him finish, and then I will read the numbers aloud. Yes, Elias said. And I will be standing right beside you. She nodded. She looked at the guttered candles at the late summer dark past the window, at the road that led toward the church green, and whatever Sunday morning would bring. Tell me about your estate, she said. He looked at her, a small surprise in his eyes at the shift. Mercer's Crossing, he said, 30 miles north. About 400 acres under cultivation. Tenant families, 12 of them, good people, been there longer than I have. A house that needed work when I inherited it and is mostly sound now." He paused. "It's not Whitcomb Hall." "I know that," she said. "That's why I asked." He was quiet for a moment. "There are ledgers," he said. "Real ones. Every disbursement, every grain charge at fair market, every widow pension paid on time and in full." Something moved in his voice, not pride exactly. Something quieter than pride. "My father left me a mess. I spent 10 years making sure the books told the truth because I found out what it feels like to discover your father's books were a lie and the people on your land had been paying for it. You need someone who can read them," Clara said. "The books." "I do," he said. "I've been managing it myself, but I'm very good with numbers," she said, quietly. "I've kept accounts since I was 16. I can read a ledger in a quarter of the time it takes most men, and I notice discrepancies that trained accountants miss." She held his gaze. "I'm not saying this to be modest or to perform capability for your benefit. I'm telling you because it's true and because I think you should know what you'd be getting." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "What are you asking?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'm asking you to know it first, before tomorrow. Before whatever comes after tomorrow. Just know it." "All right," he said. "I know it." She got up and went to the door to ask the landlord about supper, and behind her, she heard Elias lean back in his chair with the long exhale of a man who has been holding his breath without realizing it and has just been given a reason to breathe. They ate supper at the small table in the sitting room, the inn's good bread and cold roast and apple preserves that were better than anything the Whitcomb Hall kitchen had produced in 2 days, and they talked about ordinary things for the first time. His estate. Her father, who had been a school teacher and had taught her accounting out of a textbook he'd modified himself because the published versions assumed the reader was male. Samuel, who had their father's ease with numbers and had been wasted as a boy with no prospects and would not be wasted as a man with a start in Baltimore. Somewhere in the middle of the second hour, she realized she was not managing her face. She was just talking. That was not nothing with this man on this day. At 10 o'clock she went upstairs to the room the landlord had prepared, and she lay on a bed that was not narrow and did not smell of cedar and old wool, and she slept. She woke before dawn. She dressed carefully, the better dress the one she had worn out of Whitcomb Hall. She pinned her hair with more attention than she usually gave it, not because she cared about ornament, but because she understood that appearance was a language, and she intended to be fluent in it today. She intended to stand on that church green and look like exactly what she was, a woman of good sense and clear sight, who had done a precise and necessary thing and would stand behind it. When she came downstairs, Elias was already at the table with coffee, and the news that Thomas Greer's nephew had delivered word from Grover the butler would be at the church green. He had not said whether he would speak, but he would be there. It was enough. The church was 2 miles up the county road, and they arrived as the last families were filing in for the service. Clara watched the faces: county gentry, merchant families, tenant farmers in their Sunday clothes, a handful of women she recognized from years of Whitcomb Hall visits. She saw 2 of the Richmond guests from Friday's dinner. She saw the judge's wife. She did not see Nathaniel. Not yet. She found him 20 minutes later, when the congregation began to file out into the summer morning. He came out with Margaret on his arm, wearing his best coat and his most respectable expression. And for a fraction of a second, his eyes found Clara across the church green, and the expression went somewhere else entirely. Not fear, not yet, but the specific sharp calculation of a man who has been preparing his countermove, and is now determining whether the board looks the way he expected. It did not look the way he expected, because Judge Reed was already standing at the center of the green, and beside him was Thomas Greer, and beside Greer was a woman Clara recognized with a lurch in her chest. Small, dark-haired, in a plain Sunday dress, standing very still, with her hands clasped in front of her. Hannah Ferris. Reed had found Hannah Ferris. Clara had not known he would do that. She had not asked it of him. He had simply understood that the case needed a human face, and had gone out the previous evening and found the woman who had been turned away from a kitchen door twice in the spring cold, and brought her to the church green on a Sunday morning so that the county could not look at numbers alone. Clara walked forward. Nathaniel saw her moving and moved to intercept. He was fast practiced the reflexes of a man who managed social situations for a living, and he reached her before she reached Reed, and he said quietly and very close, "Clara, think about what you're doing. Think about every door this closes. Think about what people will say about a woman who—" "Nathaniel," she said just as quietly, "I have thought about it." She walked around him. She crossed the church green to Judge Reed, and Elias fell into step beside her from the direction of the carriage and in front of the Richmond banker and the judge's wife and the county families in their Sunday clothes. She handed Reed the original documents she had carried from Whitcomb Hall. Reed took them and held them where people could see. "Miss Whitcomb," he said at a volume that carried, "will you confirm for those present that these documents were obtained from the private study of Nathaniel Whitcomb's estate, and that the notations on the vestry authorization are in your uncle's hand?" "Yes," Clara said clearly. "They are." "And that these ledger pages represent 4 years of tenant grain charges and relief fund disbursements from the Whitcomb estate?" "Yes, the grain charges average 4 times the county market rate for the corresponding periods. The relief fund disbursements do not exist. The authorized church fund of $1,500 was transferred to Mr. Whitcomb's personal operating account on April 3rd of this year." The green had gone very quiet. It was not the silence of a room. It was the silence of 100 people who had been given information they would have to decide what to do with, and who understood, in the particular way, that public truth-telling creates understanding that the world had shifted slightly on its axis and could not be shifted back. Nathaniel had stopped moving. Margaret had her hand on his arm. She was looking at Clara with an expression that was no longer the polished cruelty of the dining room. It was something naked and frightened, the expression of a woman who has built her entire life on the management of appearances and is watching the management fail in public. Then Hannah Ferris stepped forward. She was small, and she was not practiced at public speaking, and her voice shook slightly at first, but it steadied as she went. She said her husband's name. She said the amount she had been promised. She said she had come to Whitcomb Hall twice and been turned away. She said that the amount had never arrived. She said it clearly. She said it in front of the whole county, and when she was done, there was a silence that was different from the one before it, heavier with the weight of something recognized. Nathaniel Whitcomb was standing on the edge of it, and the edge was crumbling, and everyone present could see it crumbling, and no one moved to help him. Reed spoke then formally professionally, with the careful language of the law about formal inquiry, about a state review, about the process by which the county court would proceed. It was not dramatic. It was methodical and precise and exactly right, because the drama had already happened, and what it needed now was process. Clara stood and listened. Elias stood beside her, not touching her, not performing protectiveness, just there, solid and present, the way he had been present from the moment he dragged a chair the length of a dining room and sat down beside her like she was worth sitting beside. When Reed finished, when the formal words were done, and the county began to move and talk, and the particular noise of public reckoning rose around them, Nathaniel turned and walked back toward his carriage without speaking. Margaret followed. 2 of the guests from Friday's dinner moved away from the direction Nathaniel had gone. The banker from Richmond crossed the green and shook Judge Reed's hand. Grover stood at the edge of the gathering still and straight-backed, and when Clara looked at him, he gave her a single brief nod, the nod of a man who has done a harder thing than it appeared and knows it. Hannah Ferris had not moved. She was standing where she had spoken, and the judge's wife had gone to her and was speaking to her quietly. And Hannah's face had something on it that Clara recognized, not happiness exactly, but the particular relief of a person who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has just been told publicly in front of people that the weight was real, that they had not imagined it. Clara felt Elias beside her. "It's done," he said. "The inquiry still has to happen," she said. "The formal review, the court proceedings." "Yes," he said. "But the silence is broken. That's the part you can't put back together," She looked at Whitcomb Hall's direction, though she couldn't see it from here. She thought about the chairs and the chipped china and the 15 years of almost. She thought about her father's ledger book, modified by hand because the published version assumed the reader was male. She thought about Samuel with his father's eyes starting something new in Baltimore. She thought about what Elias had said in the inn sitting room. You needed someone to make it matter that you noticed. She turned to him. I'd like to see Mercer's Crossing, she said. He looked at her. Something in his face went very still. The way it went still when he was making sure he was hearing what he thought he was hearing and not what he wanted to hear. When, he said. I have nowhere else to be, she said. I left Whitcomb Hall with a traveling bag this morning. My brother has a start in Baltimore, and I believe you mentioned needing someone who could read a ledger and recognize where men bury the truth. A beat. I did say that, he said. Then I'm applying for the position, she said, formally. He looked at her for a long moment. The full weight of his attention, which she had come to understand, was not a small thing, the attention of a man who did not give it casually and did not look away from what it found. The position, he said slowly, comes with certain complications. I'm aware of that. I'm not an easy man to work alongside. I've noticed, she said. I find I don't mind. The corner of his mouth moved. The almost smile she had seen twice before, except this time, it completed itself briefly and entirely, before he controlled it back into the set of his jaw. All right, Miss Whitcomb, he said. Let's go see the books. Mercer's Crossing was 30 miles north of the county church, and they covered the distance in the long gold light of a Virginia Sunday afternoon, the kind of light that makes everything look like it has already been decided and decided well. Clara did not sleep in the carriage. She sat with her traveling bag on the seat beside her and watched the road change as the county settled behind them. The familiar post road giving way to a narrower track through heavier timber, the fields opening up into longer, flatter stretches that told you the land here had been worked with patience rather than urgency. She noticed the quality of the fencing first. Good split rail maintained no rot where it met the ground. Then the tenant houses, 3 of them visible from the road, and every one with a kitchen garden and a sound roof, and the particular tidiness of people who had enough to manage their own property because they weren't being bled to cover someone else's debts. She noticed all of this without saying anything. Elias watched her noticing. You're reading it, he said. The land. The fences are well kept, she said. That means the families here have time to maintain them, which means they're not working 12 hours just to cover inflated charges. Grain charges at market rate, he said. Same as I pay at the mill. And the roof on the second house from the road needs new shingles on the east side, she said. He turned to look. I know it. I ordered the shingles 3 weeks ago. The carpenter's been behind. I'm not criticizing, she said. I'm reading. He was quiet for a moment. What else do you read? The main house needs new paint on the south face, she said as it came into view around the timberline. The kitchen garden is better tended than the front approach, which means whoever manages the house has their priorities in the right order. And you have 4 horses in the paddock that are in better condition than your carriage team, which means you bought the carriage team used, and you bought your own horses yourself. Elias looked at her. That's all correct, he said. I know, she said. The carriage stopped. A stable hand came out, young, maybe 16, who greeted Elias with the comfortable ease of someone who had worked for him long enough not to be formal about it. Elias introduced Clara without ceremony. Miss Whitcomb, she'll be staying. The boy nodded and took the horses without asking further, and Clara thought about how much was communicated in that small exchange, the quality of an employer that a young stable hand would accept his words without needing explanation. The housekeeper was a woman named Mrs. Daly, 60, broad-shouldered, with a face that had decided long ago what it thought of most things and was generally right. She looked at Clara with an assessment that was rapid and thorough and made no attempt to hide itself. Miss Whitcomb, she said, you'll want supper. I would appreciate it, Clara said. And a room. Yes. And I expect you'll want to see the books. Clara looked at her. How did you know that? Because Mr. Mercer has been doing the books himself for 4 years and making a face about it every quarter, Mrs. Daly said without inflection. Come in. I'll put you in the east room. It gets the morning light. Clara followed her inside and behind her. She heard Elias say something to Mrs. Daly in a low voice, and Mrs. Daly say something back with the tone of a woman who has been managing a household and its owner for long enough to know when she approves of a decision, and then the door closed. The east room was plain and well-proportioned and smelled of clean linen and the cedar of the chest at the foot of the bed, and the window faced the east field the way Mrs. Daly had promised. Clara set her traveling bag down and stood in the middle of the room and took 3 slow breaths. She had left a house this morning. She had stood on a church green and read numbers aloud in front of 100 people. She had asked a man she had known for 48 hours for a position that was not yet defined and would not be simple. She had done all of this in a single day, in a single dress with a traveling bag that contained 3 changes of clothing and her father's ledger book and Samuel's letter. She felt underneath the exhaustion and the residue of adrenaline, something she had not felt in a long time. She felt like she was in the right place. She went down to supper. The following week was the hardest and the most clarifying of Clara's adult life. The formal inquiry into Nathaniel Whitcomb's estate accounts opened on Wednesday, 3 days after the church green. Judge Reed moved with the efficiency of a man who had been preparing for exactly this and needed only the originals to begin the formal process. The estate books were subpoenaed through the county court by Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, the court's appointed accountant, a careful man from Richmond named Howes, had confirmed every figure Clara had copied. Not approximately. Exactly. She received a letter from Reed's office on Friday that said in the spare language of legal correspondence that her testimony and copies had been confirmed in full and that her presence at the formal proceedings the following week would be required. She read the letter at the desk in Elias's library, the real library, the working one stacked with estate records and farming almanacs, and the 4 ledger books that she had already spent 2 days reviewing, and she read it twice and set it down and picked up her pen and kept working. Elias found her there an hour later. Reed's letter came, he said. It was not a question. He had received the same confirmation from the court. It matches everything I copied, she said. Down to the last figure. I know. Howes found 2 additional diversions that I missed, she said. Both from 1814. Small amounts, but the pattern is the same. She set her pen down. I should have caught those. You were working from memory and handwritten copies by candlelight in a room you weren't supposed to be in, Elias said. That's not an excuse, she said. It's a note to do better. He looked at her for a moment. The measuring look, except by now she had learned that the measuring was not skepticism. It was the attention of a man who found what he was looking at worth attending to. How are the books? Your books are honest, she said, which means they're also inefficient. You've been keeping 3 separate grain accounts that could be consolidated into one. Your tenant ledger is organized by parcel number instead of family name, which makes it nearly impossible to track a family's account across a parcel change. And your quarterly totals don't carry forward, so every time you want a year-end figure, you're adding everything up by hand. She paused. I can fix all of that. I know you can, he said. He sat down in the chair across from her, not at the desk beside it. That's not what I'm asking. She looked up at him. I'm asking how you are, he said. She thought about it honestly, the way she had learned to think about things in the last week directly, without the filter of what she was supposed to feel or what was easier to perform. I'm tired, she said. I'm unsettled in the way you are when you've been living inside a crisis for long enough that you've forgotten what ordinary feels like, and you're not sure ordinary is coming back. She held his gaze. But I'm all right. Better than all right most of the time. She gestured at the ledgers at the desk at the room. This feels like work I was meant to be doing. I don't know how else to say it. You don't have to say it another way, he said. That's clear enough. The letter from Samuel arrived on Saturday. It came with the Morning Post addressed to Clara at Mercer's Crossing in her brother's handwriting, which meant Elias had sent word to Baltimore, or Samuel had found the address through the Caldwell connection, either of which said something important about one or both of them. She opened it at the breakfast table and read it with Elias sitting across from her, giving her privacy without leaving the room, which was precisely the right instinct. Samuel wrote the way he talked, direct and a shade too earnest and completely without pretense. Clara Caldwell received me on Tuesday. He is a serious man and I like him. He says your friend Mercer has told him I have good judgment and that he would take it as a personal favor if Caldwell would give me a start. And Caldwell said that a man like Mercer doesn't ask personal favors lightly. So here I am. I start Monday in the correspondence office, which is not glamorous, but Caldwell says it is, where you learn everything. I am well. I am glad you walked out of that house. I have been wanting to say that to you for 2 years, and I didn't have the words for it before, but I have them now. I am glad you walked out. Tell Mr. Mercer I intend to earn what he has given me. Samuel. She read it twice. Then she folded it and set it down and looked at the window for a moment without speaking. Good news, Elias said. He starts Monday, she said. He says he intends to earn what you've given him. I have no doubt he will, Elias said. You did that before you knew me, she said. The letter to Caldwell. You wrote it before you arrived at Whitcomb Hall. You didn't know if I was worth helping. You didn't know if Samuel was worth vouching for. You just... She stopped. I knew your uncle wouldn't help him, Elias said. That was enough. You risk a great deal on principle, she said. I've been told that's a character flaw, he said. By whom? My father's attorney, he said. Every Richmond banker I've ever dealt with, my late wife's mother. The mention of his wife was quiet and even, and Clara heard it the way she had heard everything he said carefully for what was underneath it. Catherine was a good woman, he said. We were not suited. We were respectful of each other, and we were not suited, and she died 3 years into the marriage of a fever, and I have spent 4 years since being managed by well-meaning county families who think what I need is to find another wife quickly and settle into something comfortable. He looked at the window. I don't want something comfortable. I never have. Clara looked at him. What do you want? She said. He turned from the window and looked at her directly. Something real, he said. Someone who tells me when the east roof needs shingles and keeps books that don't require me to add the same column 4 times, and can stand on a church green in front of 100 people and read numbers aloud without shaking. He paused. Someone who knows where men bury the truth and is not afraid to dig. The room was quiet. That's a very particular description, Clara said. I'm a particular man, he said. She held his gaze. She felt the weight of it, not heaviness, the weight of something real, the thing he had said he wanted, something honest and specific and asking to be received honestly. I'm not going to be easy to be around, she said. I'll disagree with you. I'll tell you when you're wrong. I'll notice things you'd rather not have noticed, and I won't be quiet about them. I'm counting on it, he said. And I'm not doing this out of gratitude, she said. I want that to be clear between us. Not the letter to Caldwell, not the chair in the dining room, not any of it. I make my own decisions. Clara, he said. I know that. I've known that since 5 o'clock Saturday morning when you came back from that study with 4 years of accounts in your pocket. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, All right. Just that. Just 2 words. But he heard what was in them, all the weight and the intention and the choice made cleanly and without conditions, and something in his face went very still with the particular stillness of a man receiving something he wanted and was not going to pretend otherwise. All right, he said. The formal proceedings at the county courthouse took place the following Tuesday, and they were not dramatic. Drama had already happened on the church green. The courthouse was where the drama became permanent. Clara sat in the witness chair and answered questions from Reed's appointed counsel in the clear, even voice she had rehearsed not at all, because she had nothing to rehearse. She told the truth. She told it in the same sequence she had worked through in the dark of the Whitcomb Hall guest room, the ledgers, the numbers, the vestry authorization, the notation in her uncle's hand. She was cross-examined by Nathaniel's counsel, a precise man from Richmond named Aldrich, who tried 4 different approaches to make her testimony seem motivated by personal grievance, and she answered each approach with numbers, because numbers did not have grievances, and Aldrich eventually understood that. Grover testified after her. He stood in the witness chair with the straight-backed dignity of 22 years of professional service, and he told the court what he had witnessed. His voice did not shake. He was, Clara thought, the bravest person in the room, not because what he had done was the most dangerous, but because he had carried the knowledge of what was in those ledgers for 2 years and had finally stopped carrying it alone. Hannah Ferris testified last. She had dressed carefully for it, her best dress, her Sunday shoes, her hair pinned with the particular precision of a woman who understood that how you appeared before a court mattered and had done what she could. She said her husband's name. She said the amount she was owed. She said she had been turned away twice. She said it all exactly as she had said it on the church green, except this time it was under oath and written into the court record, and this time when she finished, Nathaniel Whitcomb's counsel did not cross-examine her. There was nothing to gain by cross-examining Hannah Ferris. The formal inquiry was expanded to a full audit 2 days later. The audit would take months. The full accounting of what had been taken and what was owed would take longer. There would be no clean single verdict, no moment when a gavel came down and everything was resolved. That was not how these things worked. What there was instead was a process slow, methodical, unglamorous, by which the truth was confirmed and recorded and made permanent, and by which the people who had been robbed began incrementally to be made whole. Clara understood that. She had never expected a clean ending. She had expected a real one. 3 weeks after the church green, a letter arrived from Nathaniel's solicitor, not to Clara, but to Elias, as was the legal custom of the time, acknowledging that the relief funds owed to the 12 tenant families and 6 widow households would be paid in full pending the audit conclusion, and that the estate would cooperate with the court's appointed accountant for the duration of the review. Elias brought the letter to Clara at the library desk. She read it. "He's trying to limit the damage," she said. "Yes," Elias said. "It won't work. But it means the money gets to the families sooner, which matters more than whether he escapes the worst of the consequences." Clara set the letter down. She thought about Hannah Ferris. She thought about the 6 other widow households, the 12 tenant families, the 4 years of grain charges paid above market rate. She thought about what $1,500 meant to a woman who had come to a kitchen door twice in the spring cold and been turned away. "I want to go see her," she said. "Hannah Ferris." Elias looked at her. "Now, this week," she said, "I want to tell her myself that the money is coming, not through a court letter. I want her to hear it from a person who looked her husband's name in the face when she read those ledgers." She paused. "Is that foolish?" "No," he said. "It's right." He looked at the letter, then at her. "I'll come with you." They went on Thursday in the carriage with no particular announcement. Hannah Ferris's farm was small and well-worked, and she came to the door with flour on her hands, from the morning's baking, and looked at them both with the careful expression of a woman who had learned not to expect good things from unannounced visitors. Clara told her about the solicitor's letter. She told her the amount. She told her the process. She told her it would take time. She was honest about that, because Hannah Ferris had been told comforting things before, and they had come to nothing, and the truth, even the slow truth, was better. Hannah Ferris listened to all of it without speaking. When Clara finished, there was a silence. Then Hannah said, "My husband worked that south parcel for 11 years. Her voice was steady. He never once complained. He thought Mr. Whitcomb was a fair man. He died thinking that. She looked at Clara. He wasn't a fair man. No, Clara said. He was not. But you are, Hannah said. And that counts for something. Clara drove back to Mercer's Crossing in silence, and Elias let her have it, which was the right thing, which she had come to expect from him. October arrived the way October arrives in Virginia, sudden and serious, the first cold coming in overnight and staying the fields changing color in a matter of days. Mercer's Crossing had settled into its autumn rhythms, and Clara had settled into hers, and the two had become over the course of 3 months largely indistinguishable. She had restructured the estate accounts entirely. The 3 grain ledgers were now one. The tenant records were organized by family name. The quarterly totals carried forward automatically in the system she had designed, which she had based on the accounting method her father had modified for her when she was 16, and improved with everything she had learned since. The first time Elias did his quarterly review with the new system, it took him 40 minutes instead of an entire day. He stood at the desk when he finished, and looked at the ledger with the expression of a man who has been carrying a heavy load for a long time and has just been shown there was a better way to carry it. "This is," he started. "I know," she said. "You should charge for this," he said. "Other estates." "I intend to," she said. "Eventually, when we have this one running the way it should." He looked at her. We, she said without apology. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Samuel came for a visit in November, 4 days on his way back from a courier run to Richmond for Caldwell's office. He was taller than Clara remembered, or maybe just more settled in his height, more confident in the space he occupied. He shook Elias's hand at the door with the directness of a young man who had learned in 3 months that the world responded to directness, and Elias received it with the equal directness of a man who respected it. That evening, the 3 of them sat at the table in the Mercer's Crossing dining room. Not a grand table, not a table with strategic seating arrangements. Just a table with food on it, and 3 people who had earned their places at it. And Samuel talked about Baltimore, and Caldwell, and the things he was learning about naval supply logistics, and the letter Clara had written him from the Hartley Inn which he had kept. "You said I was free," he said. "In the letter. You said that was what the whole thing was about." "It was," Clara said. "Were you free?" he asked. When you walked out of the hall, she thought about it honestly. "Not immediately," she said. "It takes a while. You spend so long inside a thing that even when you leave it, it comes with you for a bit." She looked at her hands. "But yes, eventually." "Yes," Samuel nodded. He looked at Elias with the assessing look of a younger sibling who is deciding whether the man at his sister's table is worth the position he occupies. "You moved your chair," Samuel said. "Beg your pardon," Elias said. "At the dinner. You moved your chair down to her end of the table." Samuel looked at him. "That was the beginning of everything." "It was," Elias said. "Why?" Samuel said. "You didn't know her." Elias was quiet for a moment. He looked at Clara, and she looked back at him, and there was something between them in that look that Samuel at 17 was perhaps too young to fully read, but old enough to recognize as something serious. "Because men like your uncle depend on everybody sitting still," Elias said. "And I've never been very good at sitting still." Samuel thought about that. Then he nodded the way young men nod when they have received something they intend to keep. Winter came the way things come when they are settled and earned without drama, without announcement. Just the gradual accumulation of cold mornings and early evenings, and the smell of wood smoke, and the sound of the house adjusting to the temperature. Elias asked her in December. Not formally, not with the ceremony that the county families would have expected from a man of his position, no arranged parlor moment, no prepared speech. He asked her in the library, where they had been reviewing the winter accounts together, where the fire had burned down to coals, and it was late, and they had been working for 3 hours in the companionable quiet that had become the texture of their days together. He set his pen down and looked at her and said, "Clara, marry me." 2 words after her name. Just that. She put her pen down. She looked at him, at the face she had first seen across a dining room, the face that had been weathered by something more serious than Virginia summers, the face that went quiet when things got hard and told the truth regardless of whether the truth was convenient. "You're not easy to be around," she said. "Neither are you," he said. "I find I don't mind." She had said those words to him. Back in September in the carriage at the beginning of all this. He had remembered them, and he was giving them back to her. And there was something in the fact that he had kept them, that told her everything she needed to know about the kind of man who would do it. "All right," she said, same 2 words she had used before, and like before he heard everything in them. In January they hosted a dinner at Mercer's Crossing. Not a grand affair, but a real one, with the tenant families and the county judge, and his wife, and Hannah Ferris, and Thomas Greer. And because Clara had asked, and Elias had agreed without hesitation, a widow from the East Farm whose husband had died the previous spring, and who had nowhere else to be on a cold January evening. The widow arrived late, a little uncertain, and the steward, new to the house, young, well-intentioned, but not yet practiced, placed her name card at the far end of the table by the servant's door. Clara heard it before she saw it. The small particular sound of a chair being moved. Not scraped moved. Deliberately and quietly, the way you move a thing when you are not making a statement, but simply doing what is right. She looked. The widow was still standing, and Elias Mercer, without fanfare, without announcement, with the absolute ease of a man for whom this was no longer a gesture, but simply how things were done, had picked up his chair from the head of the table and was carrying it the full length of the room to place it beside her. Clara watched him set it down. She watched the widow look up at him with the startled expression of someone who has not been treated like they matter, and is not sure what to do when they suddenly are. She watched Elias sit down beside her, and say in the quiet, certain voice she knew completely by now, "The company is better down here, ma'am." Clara did not move her chair. She did not need to. She had already moved it 3 months ago in her own way, on a church green, in a judge's office, at a library desk, in the early morning, with numbers spread out in front of her, and the truth finally looking back. She sat at her own place at the table, and she watched the room, the tenant families, the judge's wife, Hannah Ferris, the widow, with her startled, warming face, and she felt the weight and the rightness of it settle around her, like something that had always been here, waiting for the right people to build it. She picked up her wine glass. She looked at Elias across the length of the table, and he looked at her with the full weight of his attention. The attention that was not a small thing that she had learned to receive without flinching. And something passed between them that did not need to be spoken, because it had already been lived. Some lessons once learned become something permanent. Some acts of decency once witnessed change the people who witness them into people who cannot help but repeat them. Some chairs once moved, stay moved, not because of the gesture, but because of everything that follows from it. The long chain of consequences that begins with one person deciding that sitting still is no longer something they are willing to do. Clara Whitcomb had walked through mud and rain to beg a signature from a man who was never going to give it. She had sat at the wrong end of a table with chipped china and cold drafts and 15 years of almost. She had stood in a library at 5 in the morning and looked at numbers that told the truth about everything she had been refusing to see. And she had walked out, not rescued, not lucky, not the beneficiary of a powerful man's charity. She had walked out on her own terms, carrying the truth in her own hands. And she had built something real from what she found on the other side of the door. Real work, real books, real people, a real life with a man who had learned the same hard lesson she had and chosen to live differently because of it. The dinner went on around her, warm and full and honest. And outside, the Virginia winter pressed against the windows of Mercer's Crossing, and inside at the far end of the table, a widow who had arrived uncertain was laughing at something Elias had said. The lesson had become a legacy, and the legacy from this night forward was hers.